Hey guys, this is Myleek and this is the podcast. Today, I am thrilled to bring you a discussion that has the potential to reshape your perspective on mental health, personal growth, and the idea of purpose. Our guest today is the esteemed Dr. Rheeda Walker, a renowned psychologist whose recent book, The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health, has not only deepened my understanding of mental health, but also left a lasting impact on me. And I am sure it will do the same for you. I am serious. I have been on my therapy journey for over a decade and trust that I have learned a lot. However, when I started listening to Dr. Walker's book, I realized that there was still so much more that I didn't know. This book is filled with so many valuable insights and strategies that will change how we think about mental wellness, whether you're going through difficult times or not. So let me tell you about today's episode. Today, we will discuss the importance of mental health as a communal issue, the different pressures that affect us, and the significance of understanding our psychological fortitude. Write that down because I don't ever want you to forget that. This episode benefits everyone. Whether you are thinking about going to therapy, or you just want to enhance your knowledge about mental health, or you just want to hear about a popular book that a lot of people are talking about, this is for you. Now, I need to tell you that today's episode contains conversations about mental health difficulties, including mentions of suicide. These topics can be sensitive and may trigger distress. If you find such content distressing, please prioritize your well-being. If you need any support, please do not hesitate to seek help from mental health professionals and or hotlines in your area. Your mental health is incredibly important to me. It is crucial, and there is support available. Let's get started.
Mom deserves the best, and there's no better place to shop for Mother's Day than Whole Foods Market. They're your destination for unbeatable savings, from premium gifts to show-stopping flowers and irresistible desserts. Start by saving 33% with Prime on all body care and candles. Then get a 15-stem bunch of tulips for just $9.99 each with Prime. Round out Mom's menu with festive rosé, irresistible berry chantilly cake, and more special treats. Come celebrate Mother's Day at Whole Foods Market.
Okay, I am admittedly very, very excited about today's interview. Dr. Rheeda Walker, before we get into all the things I have for you, I really want to tell you about your book and how I discovered it. So I saw your book when it came out, and I have read a lot of mental health and self-help books over the years. I've been in therapy it'll be 12 years this summer. And so when I saw your book, I didn't feel an urgency because I thought, oh my God, what's left to know? And then I took a road trip. Last month, I think. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to press play on this book. And my goodness, this is a book. And so I really think it's important to say that I know that we are in a time where I feel like there's all these concepts and there's more therapists online and there's so many more terms. And I even think for us as Black people, it's like, okay, yes, we've been invited to the conversation, but I feel like with your book, you introduced me to so many concepts and ideas and helped me gain clarity and understanding around my immediate and extended family. And so I felt like that was a piece that was really missing for me, because when you're doing therapy and quote unquote self-help, you're really just focusing on yourself. And it's, we don't, I don't know, I guess it's just like we think about our other family members and we have some like base level terms, but I was like, oh wow, she really did this. And so this is a really incredible body of work that you have created. And I think it is so important that I say that to you before we get started. So for anyone who has been on the fence, because I feel like for so many of us, we've been kind of bombarded. This is the book. This is the book. So welcome.
You know, the audience can't see me, but I'm just over here, you know, doing all the nonverbals, because that's just that is an endorsement that really just it warms my heart exceedingly, exceedingly. But yeah, there are all kinds of things we can say, but I'm ready. I'm ready.
It's so well written. I mean, I listened to it and it felt like a long conversation with you. And I just think people just don't nail these kinds of things in that way. And so it's relatable, it's digestible. And so I'm going to just get started and say, why is it so exhausting to be Black in the United States? I feel like I know, but even in listening to your book, I'm like, dang, yes.
And because it's exhausting for all the many different ways that I can approach this, right?
Okay.
So
yeah,
on the one hand, there is the, you know, fight or flight or freeze system that our bodies are constantly in. And for those who aren't familiar with it, when you think about just the idea, I like to give the example, imagine you're in the woods and you hear something and you thought you were in the woods by yourself. I don't know why you're in the woods, but you're in the woods.
Right.
And your body has to prepare to engage or to flee. And that's not a natural thing. Like the body physiologically, you know, has to get prepared.
Yeah.
Your body doesn't know the difference between a real bear in the woods and your manager or boss at the job that you have to gear up for.
Yeah.
And it wears on the body, like physically. And that is the thing that I don't think most of us are aware of. We just like, well, it's just what we do. But the thing is the repetition of that, you know, starts to dysregulate our systems. And that's why we start to see hypertension and stroke, of which, you know, Black women are more likely to die from.
Yeah.
And then there is the part of, you know, I mentioned the physiological part, but then we're thinking about, well, the doctor, I got to go see the doctor, but can I trust the doctor? What do I need to do to get the doctor to trust me? And so we have to do these mental gymnastics in order to figure out how to fit in, how to get our needs met in ways that other people just don't have to do and can't even relate to. And so then they say things like, well, are you sure it's that? And we hear these things so often, these non-affirming these messages, but we know our reality. And it's like, we're sometimes struggling with ourselves. We're struggling with the outside. We're struggling with our physical bodies. And then folks say things like, oh, but you're so strong. And I know we've been seeing it more often, you know, I'm like, I don't want to be strong because we're exhausted, you know, and I, you know, all the ways, you know, trying to figure out the right neighborhood and is my child going to be safe at the school and all the ways it accumulates. It really does.
It really does. And it's all day, every day, seemingly. So in the beginning of the book, you give some statistics. You talk about anxiety, depression, and suicide rates in Black Americans. Can you talk about those statistics with us? Because I don't know why I felt so shocked by this as I listened.
And it's interesting because, and this is the work that I've been doing for 20 years. So when I went into my PhD program, this is the work that I started. And at the time, the suicide death rates were going up then.
Okay.
And actually, I was surprised because I was like the community. Oh, well, that's not anything that we do. That does not happen for us.
Right.
Well, the rate started to go down. And then in about the 2000s or so, they started to peak back up again.
Okay.
And that's actually why I wrote the book, because the suicide rates were increasing significantly for 5 to 11-year-old Black children.
Wow.
It almost doubled, but they were going down for white children. And even the statisticians, the epidemiologists who track this data noted in a New York Times article, I think, that they had to redo the data because they were surprised by it.
Right.
What are these numbers? And so even as we think about, you know, so starting with youth, and that's why I wrote that prompted me to write the book.
Okay.
I was thinking, well, somebody needs to talk about this. And
Yes.
apparently I was on divine assignment and I had to be the person.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Okay.
But then also when we look at, as we get older, so for individuals aged 19 and younger, it's about the third leading cause of death. So
wow.
after homicide, after accidents, it's suicide. And then a little bit older, it goes up to the fourth leading cause of death because of heart disease.
Right.
But other than that, we are dying by suicide. It's not being talked about. And the part that is the reason that I wrote the book is because I truly believe suicide to be preventable.
Yeah.
One, if we knew it, yes, can happen. And two, if we knew how to communicate and be in better community with one another.
I will tell you, as I was on the highway and I was listening to your book, and when you said you were going to talk about suicide, and then the way I felt like, I don't know, I felt like that's why I was like, almost like the sky opened up, because I was just like, I feel like we're all too afraid to talk about this. I think culturally, it's just like, no, we're not going to talk about that. And I just felt there was a warmth, and there was a confidence, and there was there was like an alarm, like you are sounding a very important alarm, that this, like, when 5 to 11, you were talking about babies, and I just, now there is something that you brought up, and I noticed, and this is why I was like, I got to buy the book. I got to get it on Kindle because I like to highlight my notes. And not enough people have highlighted your notes online. So that's why I was like, I got to get the Kindle and I got to upload it to Goodreads because I need people to understand this. But you mentioned a term, and I wasn't sure if it was like slow suicide that resonated with me so deeply and so personally. And I'm not sure, was that the term? But you were saying, because I think when we think about suicide, we think about the things that we read about and we see. But you mentioned this sort of like slower one that I was just like, that I felt we have to talk about that.
Yeah. Yes. In the book, I called it low-key suicide.
Low-key. Okay. Yes. Low-key.
We do a lot of things that are low-key.
Yeah.
The reason that I mention that is because there are things that we do that directly or indirectly shorten our lifespan that we could change and undo, but we continue to engage in these behaviors. And I have myself, I guess, low-key become someone who is a health psychologist, because we know that a lot of health concerns, people who have type 2 diabetes and hypertension, things of that nature, oftentimes, or 50% of the time, also experience depression. So people with chronic illness, of which we are overly represented, also experience serious mental health challenges.
Yes.
And so imagine the doctor says, okay, with this diabetes, you have to exercise in order to be able to manage your A1C.
Right.
But you don't feel like exercising because you're depressed.
Yes.
Because the depression is unmanaged. Like, part of depression is low mood, low energy. The doctor is saying you have to be able to manage your A1C with insulin, and you got to take medication.
Yes.
But there is cognitive deficits associated with depression.
Yes.
And someone has said, you got to get help for these things. But the person is, meanwhile, sending their nephew down to the corner store to get their favorite snacks and undermining their health. And the doctor is saying, if you continue these behaviors, you're going to die early. Yeah. You get the messaging, but somehow it gets missed. And I really do believe that it just gets buried in the muck and mire of undiagnosed and untreated depression and anxiety, because we just push through. That's what we do. You just push through. Yeah. It's part of our mantra, but it is also quietly killing us.
That's what it's like when I think about just extended family, immediate family. And when you connected those dots, it's just like depression. We don't talk about how, if someone has high blood pressure, diabetes, like, what are these other things that need to be addressed? And when we go into the doctor's office, I don't know that many are asking us those questions. It's just more like it feels like a personal failing more than anything. And it's just like, I mean, how can someone decide to go, hop on the Peloton after they feel like a failure? I have some other questions, but can you spend some time with anxiety for us? Because I feel like even after I had been doing therapy for several years, and I learned that like a phobia that I had was like, I don't like vomit, even though I told you I've been up with my daughter with the stomach bug. And it was like, oh, you have anxiety around, it's because it's not the vomiting that bothers me. It's all the stuff that comes up to it. And I think you brought up something about African Americans and phobias, and how I feel like we have more phobias than usual. But when it was like anxiety, I'm like, I don't have anxiety, And why? I don't even know what the question is, but like, what is it with us and us not feeling like some of these terms? I just feel like, I'm going to be honest, I feel like anxiety is like white people get anxious. I don't know that that's for me, but that's not true.
Oh, my leak. You open up all these things. And I'm like, ooh, where do I
start? I know. I'm like, I'm asking 30 questions. Pick one or two.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's start with the definition, because, a lot of times, especially in our now popular culture that mental health has become mainstream, people use language and don't always know definitions. Right. And so, it may help to think about, depression as like maybe low mood, but then there's also incidentally agitation that goes with depression. So a lot of our depression gets masked. I think I talk about this in the book. A lot of our depression gets masked because we have the capacity to push through, but it doesn't mean that we're not empty on the inside. So that depression bucket.
Okay.
And we talk about depression and anxiety because they are the two most commonly diagnosed mental health challenges.
Right.
Interestingly, if I can tie this very briefly back to suicide, it seems like anxiety might be more related to our suicide vulnerability than is depression in the Black community.
Okay.
But then also anxiety and depression co-occur, meaning that about 50% of people or so who have depression also have anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety is about the worry. And the worry oftentimes is a fear of not being able to handle what's going to happen or what's going on or what's anticipated. So it's anticipatory fear, and that the person won't be able to handle the thing that's coming. And so even if you talk about, like the vomit, there may be a part of you that's like, and everything that comes with it. Like, I just don't know if I have the wherewithal to deal with all of this.
Yeah.
And by the way, I can relate to it. It's kind of embarrassing a little bit, but sometimes when my son has, these episodes, I start gagging.
Yeah.
And there have been moments when my son is looking at me like, what is wrong with you, lady? Like, I'm sick. What's going on with you?
That is how I feel. I told my therapist, I said, my kids are going to be like, she left us hanging every time we puked, because I'm like, Dad, help.
We're doing the best we can.
Yeah.
We're present, and we're doing the best we can. And we can label these things. I think it does allow us to be able to manage them better, because we have different kinds of expectations. And so with regard to our anxieties, because there's a lot of different ways to think about anxiety, and I get that you got that from the book.
Right.
So we have, as an example, fears about or things that we manage around cleanliness. Honestly, I don't remember if I talked about this in the book. We need things.
I think you did, because when I tell you this book, you were hitting, like, I remember my mom being like, everything had to be clean, to the point of like, oh my gosh. But you did. I think you did talk about this, but tell us, because I think this is really important, especially as a parent, because it's just hard to manage this much cleanliness as a parent.
Yes. And I think I do believe that part to be cultural. And that's why I had to write the book for us.
Yes.
To start to label and point out some things that we have learned. That's what culture is learned behavior over the generations, because of what we had control over and what we didn't have control over.
Right.
And we feel like we have control over what's clean, and we need things to be a certain way. And sometimes it can start to be a little bit obsessive.
Yes.
And, in order to manage the anxiety about cleanliness, you got to clean, you got to do all the things, you have to check, and you have to be sure.
Yeah.
And so we generally have heightened levels of anxiety that have been passed on to us generationally, that we manage with the things around us. And if you can even anticipate just how we deal with the violence in our society, and us having to figure out how to keep ourselves safe, how to keep our families and our children safe. That raises our level of awareness of the environment.
Yeah.
And even raising the level of awareness increases vulnerability to anxiety.
Yeah.
Because we have to have this sort of vigilance.
Yes.
Like I have to be mindful all the time of what's happening. And that's why I talk so much about things like deep breathing.
Yeah.
And noticing when your gear shifting up, that you can engage in deep breathing to really manage that fight or flight system so that the body isn't so dysregulated when things happen.
Yeah. So that's going to bring me to what I think is just genius, your PF, the psychological fortitude, because I was like, now this sticks. It's easy to remember. And I think of it just kind of like my daily SPF. You have a new workbook that is helping us with this daily PF, which is psychological fortitude. Can you share this concept with us and then some ways to replenish it when it's low?
Yes. So I'll tell you how it came about. When I talk about research I started years ago, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, but I'm a full-time university professor, and we have to engage in research at research-intensive institutions.
Okay.
And part of doing that for me is understanding the inner realities of our community.
Right.
But not just talking about our pathology, but talking about our resilience.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that we don't want to talk about mental health.
Yeah.
We're getting better.
We're getting better.
We don't want that. That's still not for us, but we'll go along.
Right.
And for me as a clinician, it's important to meet us where we are. Otherwise, the message doesn't stick. And so we need to be able to talk about how we function day to day and how we make adjustments to our lives in healthy and adaptive ways in order to be able to function.
Right.
Mental health at its core is about being able to function.
Right.
And so that's how psychological fortitude came about. And incidentally, I managed to get through that whole first book without defining the thing at all. I kept labeling the thing and giving examples of it, but I never defined it.
Okay.
In the workbook, it is defined, and it is the 0 to 10 rating of one's capacity to be able to use their minds, to be able to think. And I know for me and for many others, sometimes we feel like I just can't even think right now.
Right.
We have to be able to think. We have to be able to manage our emotions so that our emotions are in proportion to whatever the situation or circumstance is.
Right.
We have to be able to work inside or outside the home. We have to be able to, some of us are also in school, to take care of our schoolwork and our families, grandparents, like all of our responsibilities while navigating the threats to those responsibilities, because stuff happens.
Right.
We have no control over them. And so we need to be able to manage the things that come up. And I know for me, when I know that I'm kind of peaking at my limit, I say to myself, if anybody says one more thing to me, I might be at a 5 right now. Okay, I got to take a step back. And so to be able to manage all those things, to manage the threats, and to tap into our life purpose. Because I am certain that we are each here for a reason.
Yes.
And we're not here for the same reason, which is why we get in trouble with these comparisons we make.
Right.
We are all here for our own reason, but we can't connect with that if our psychological fortitude is low. So it's the 0 to 10 rating, 0 being I can't take care of none of that.
Right.
And 10 is I am cooking with grease.
Yes.
When the person gets to be, 6 or lower, something's got to shift.
Okay.
The shift is in one or two directions, or maybe both at the same time. One is adding the good stuff, right? Like we don't think about that.
Right.
Sometimes we think about getting a mani-pedi.
Right.
But sometimes it's just stepping outside and getting some sunshine.
Okay.
Whatever the good things are. And, I talk about that all throughout the workbook because the workbook is about psychological fortitude.
Yeah.
But then the other part is removing the things that are subtracting, taking away from our psychological fortitude.
Yeah.
And sometimes, those are tough decisions, that we have to make. And, boundaries, with family members,
Yes.
tasks that we've taken on that we don't need to, but we think we should,
Right.
and things of that nature. And so psychological fortitude, in my mind, you got to first start with the rating. Something has shifted. Take a moment and say, okay, what's my PF?
Mm.
Where am I? Okay, I'm at a 4. Oh my goodness. I got to shut down everything, take a nap. I don't know. Go take a cold shower, do something.
Yeah.
Or I need to call someone. I need to
Yeah.
phone a friend.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts with the assessment because we're ripping and running so much that we don't take time to evaluate where we are.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing I think about PF is that it doesn't have to be a perfect number.
Mm.
I know a lot of your listeners are, overachievers doing all the things.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a perfect number.
Yeah.
But if you compare, say like, well, yesterday I was at an 8, but today I'm at a 6. What happened? Or I was at a 5, I called a friend, and now I'm at least at a 6.5.
Right.
Okay, that's the friend I need to call next time, and I'll let them know. And guess what? I'll ask them their PF, when I see them, so that we're all using a common language that allows us to be able to, again, be more in community.
Yeah, like, where are you? How are you? And, it's like, instead of that, like, how are you doing text, it could be just like, what's your PF? And if it's low, it's like, do you want to call, or if it's high, it's like, what you doing? Tell me about it. Maybe I can borrow from it. Yes. I just thought, I was like, this is just so helpful because I feel like there are just things like self-care and that are just so elusive. And this feels like a way to do it. And like I said, super fan of your book. And then I got the workbook and I was like, oh, this is the one, because there are people who are like, well, what can I do if I can't afford therapy, or, how can I help myself? And this is something that you can do to help yourself. And so, another thing that I love about the workbook is you answer every question under the sun as it relates to being Black and going to therapy. And I'm telling you, every question, you guys. And so I'm going to ask a couple of them. They're in the book, but I'm going to ask you again here. And the very first one is, isn't therapy for white people?
Well, yes, of course. No, I'm kidding.
Right. This isn't for us.
It's interesting. And at this point, I'm wondering what I said in the book, but I do know this from talking to people, that there are things that are built into different cultures that don't seem like they align for other cultures.
Right.
And so for us, going to talk to a stranger about the things that are going on for us, like that just doesn't compute.
Right.
It just doesn't.
Telling people your business.
Right. The business stays in the house.
Yeah.
And that is culturally what we do. And it's understandable. And even if it doesn't stay in the house, it might go to our hairstylist.
Right.
Or our nail person.
Yeah.
Because we need to be able to release stuff.
Right.
Right. But when we talk to a professional who is trained and licensed to be non-judgmental, which is unfortunately what we can get, from our loved ones.
Totally.
Who also sometimes will say, oh, it's not that bad, or, well, let me tell you what I did, and what they did has nothing to do with your options.
Mm-hmm.
When we can talk to a professional who's non-judgmental, and they don't just, listen and parrot our responses,
right.
They help to shift our thinking, hopefully,
yep.
in ways that allow us to expand our thinking and to expand our capacity to problem solve whatever that situation might be in the moment.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I think that happens with the concern about therapy is that this person is going to tell my business.
Mm-hmm.
But what's built into our licensing and our training is absolute confidentiality. Unless the person is believed to be a threat, to themselves or to others.
Okay. We
are duty bound not to disclose any of what's, shared in therapy. And I think that's important for people to know.
That is very important, is that I'm going to tell someone, I'm going to tell a stranger, and then a stranger just knows my business, or they are judgmental. And I think that is when you said that, it's like, I remember sharing something that I felt I've been judged before, and sharing it with my therapist, and just watching, like, having this expectation of like a face being made. And like, when I tell you just like nothing, I was like, dang, wow. This woman she has heard it all. If this is not, and it's just like, you do need a place where you can go and share things that you might be embarrassed about, or you might have some shame around, and like to have a professional, like you said, help you problem solve. I think that's the big idea that I think I took away from the book, is that we have normalized so much. And I feel like just because something is normal for you doesn't mean that it cannot be addressed, and you don't have to feel this way forever. And I think that's the part that so many of us, I feel like we just are like, well, things are just this way. It's always been this way. My mom's life was this way. Everybody in my family. And it's like, things can change. And so that's what I found so helpful. Another question I want to ask you is, how can I make the most of therapy? I mean, it's expensive. There are some resources, the Loveland Foundation. I am on the board of Open Path Collective. Like, there are places with affordable and free therapy. How do I make the most of it?
I think first and foremost, go into it with an open mind and ready for change. And being prepared to do what it takes to change. We do see a lot of folks, because I supervise clinical cases, and we see, the overwhelming majority of folks come in and they want the therapist, I think, to maybe wave a magic wand and say, bam, you're healed in 4 sessions or less. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our stuff oftentimes is deep-seated, understandably. You get to be a certain age. If you've been doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40 so years, it's going to take a little time to undo that.
Yeah.
But hear the therapist, take the assignments between sessions, do the assignments. If there are any concerns, be open with the therapist about that. I had a hard time with this because this, and can we figure out how to do, to make this more manageable for me, remove the barriers, and just be devoted to the process. Like, we're devoted to, like, brush your teeth,
right,
do your therapy homework.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the single most important things that we can do when we show up for therapy.
I love that. I will share a personal story. When I first started therapy, I remember, like, after 2 sessions, I was like, okay, so, like, where's the progress report? Like, I need to know how am I progressing? How am I doing? And she said something. It was like, okay, at the time, I think I was like 32. And it was like, this is 32 years. This is 32 years of life that we are not going to pin down in, 3 hours. So commit. And I'm so glad that I did. I have 2 more questions before we get out of here. What if I feel like I'm not making progress? Because I feel like that is one of the big questions that I hear is like, I think, okay, it's been a year and I don't feel like I'm making progress.
That's an interesting question when you added the part about it being a year. Because I will say this, the work that we do is called empirically supported interventions. In full disclosure, the empirical support isn't always the empirical support. The research support, the research that backs the therapy that we're doing isn't always based in our community, because there's not a lot of folks who look like me who are doing the research to support our community.
Right.
Nevertheless, we are human. And so there are aspects of who we are just as people that supports the therapy. And that work would say that, it doesn't take 5+ years. It may take several months, but it's not going to take years per se.
Right.
However, there needs to be specific goals that are being tracked. So go in therapy saying something concrete that's like, I want to be able to achieve writing a book that I need to write in 6 months because I have this deadline, but I have paralysis, I have amotivation, and I can't get myself going.
Yes.
I created that. I just made that up.
Yeah, but
literally just now, but
see,
it seems to work.
I don't think we know that we can go to therapy for that. Sometimes I think we feel like if we don't have something, really traumatic, that therapy, like that we could go see a therapist for something like that. That's why that's such a great example of like, there's help for that.
And so, okay, well, let's dial back a little bit, because It helps to go to therapy when there is something that's meaningful in life that is not achieved or achievable, or there's constant dysregulation in relationships,
Yeah.
or there's just some aspect of the person's life that they just can't seem to manage or get around, or that they continually struggle with. Like when we think about psychological disturbance, one of our primary questions is, how is it disrupting your life?
Yeah.
Like, how is your life impacted?
Mm-hmm.
And then the goal of therapy is, what will your life look like when it's different on the other side of therapy?
Right.
The
Yeah.
mental health professional's responsibility is to help you kind of conceptualize, this is what I think is happening. And so this is the point of intervention for what I think is happening.
Okay.
So I'm a psychologist. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. And so I'm thinking about how your thoughts are affecting your behavior and your mood that's keeping you from doing all the things that you need to be doing.
Yeah.
Someone who's a family systems therapist is probably going to look at the whole family unit
Okay.
and see, how is the family interacting in ways that are problematic.
Yeah.
I don't do family systems therapy, but I can talk to you about how you communicate effectively to get your needs met from anybody, family member, coworker,
Right.
friend, whomever.
Yeah.
And so people do want to think about, and that's another reason why the goal is important, because the goal impacts who the professional is who's helping. Maybe it's a coach of some sort that's helping to get the book written, but that process I know is less regulated, but there are people who are phenomenal coaches out there for whom will say, okay, you don't have a diagnosable or anywhere near diagnosable issue, but you've got a goal you want to meet, and I can help you meet that goal.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for the share. I think it's really important because I don't think we realize we can get help for some of the things. Like my big thing was, why is it that it was like I couldn't have a romantic relationship? Like it just is never working. How is it that I can do all these other things, but this just feels so out of touch for me? And it's like, oh, there are people that can help with that. And so I hope people understand that. And so as we get ready, go ahead.
Because you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Because as a person of faith, I also know that there are things that happen in their time.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we have to be patient about the timing.
We do.
Of things. And that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. I appreciate you adding that too. Yes, the timing. And my thing is, when the time comes for me, I would like to have some tools, to be able to maintain and sustain a relationship and not just do what I saw, or choose what I saw, which was the big thing for me, was getting some help around my selection process. So, yes. Okay. On the back of the workbook, you say, it's just a quick little snippet, reclaim your mental health and embrace unapologetic joy. And so I want to know, how do you define unapologetic joy, and what might that look like in our lives?
Well, it starts with the word that is freedom, and just being free to be our authentic selves.
Yes.
And without authorization from someone else who says, oh, it's okay for you to do that. Because we know we work so hard to fit in and navigate expectations and do all the things. But at the point when we say, you know what, I'm just going to do me.
Yep.
And tap into that freedom, I feel like the joy that's connected to that is uncontainable.
Yeah.
And so, so it's unauthorized and not needing to be authorized freedom to be in our authentic space and to be our authentic selves.
We thank you so much for this work. I'm so glad that I pressed play on the audiobook. And like I said, there is so much to learn and understand. And I have the workbook, and the workbook is actionable and easy to do and keep up with. And I think it's book club worthy because, like you said, we can then begin to check in with each other. What is your PF? How are you? just helps us get a little bit more concrete so that we can be better friends, have better community, just across the board. So thank you for coming to the podcast. Appreciate you so much.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you.
Yes.
So thank you for reading the book and also for having me here.
Indeed.